We'll be back from the break. You're still watching the Policon, where we discuss politics and economics. And well, today's show is highly driven with the political point of view about looking at the inclusion of persons with disability as a very key concern. And I'm still with my two guests, and of course the third guest, who is a guest in the situation. But well, of course, his audio settings are in place for you to make sure that you get what Mr. Deo Gracious, who is representing the persons with disabilities, is definitely trying to put out for us. Now, as we're getting into our final part of the conversation, just briefly to just hint on the members of parliament representing persons with disabilities. We have Honorable Mpindi, we've got Honorable Laura Kanushu, who is the National Female Persons with Disabilities Member of Parliament. Then we have Honorable Achan, Honorable Asamo, and Honorable Ndenzi. All those are the five who are representing persons with disabilities in this current Parliament. And as we continue to have further discussions in regards to this, now we turn our concern on the recommendations of what my two guests believe should be considered as we are moving into the next financial year. But not only that, the 2026 general elections that will be happening in Uganda. And of course, I'll be starting with Mr. Otima Ivan. When you look at some of the recommendations, like you've mentioned, we've been mentioning quite a number of those. But what are some of the key recommendations that you think government should treat as a priority?
The first one that is very key is national data. We have a census projected for this year, and hopefully it doesn't be recalled because of limitation of resources. But if it happens, then we must go in with a very clean data sheet on how we can collect national data in disability disaggregated kind of information. This will help even government across administering economic welfare for people with disabilities and services, because they will know who they're dealing with and what kind of support this kind of people will need. So beyond even the elections, national data aggregated in disability will move a very long way in enabling the Electoral Commission administer the elections from an inclusive perspective. They will know how many braille materials to support with. They will know what's assistive technology. For example, I'm just giving you an example. Within our electoral laws, we have the use of the biometric voter machine, right? But it comes with an assumption that all of us have limbs. So we have a disability where people don't have limbs. You know, you have your hands and limbs are off. So how is that someone going to be able to participate? So you have those kinds of limitations. The other issue is we're looking at is amending the schedule for disability categorization within the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. And that means that you need to go further to expand the list of disability categories from the normal 8 to probably the number that we can imagine, maybe about, I don't know, about 10 or 15, so that then the planning takes shape for other categories. We have disabilities that are not known. For example, you have someone who's deaf, blind. That is a multiple disability. Even within the categorization, that is a very difficult disability to manage. But if you have data and if you are able to have a mapping of coding of those kinds of people, then you can know how to support them. The other recommendation that we are putting out for is amending the National Youth Council Act to kind of drive a structural approach for disability inclusion for young people from the village level. Let the young people with disability be represented from the village level rather than being nominated at a national level. So the nominee for a young person with disability at the National Youth Council is not an inclusive an engagement. We have the Constitution giving us inclusion all the way, but when it comes to the practice, we are kind of doing an exclusive kind of approach, which is one of the things that we would like to highlight. The other recommendation is that I also will be highlighting about is if it's about the cost and it's a limitation, can we come up and address the nomination cost? Because me and you will want to stand for this position. But from the look of things, looks like the legal framework has gazetted who is able to stand for an election. The people that have the resources will continuously be the ones being in these positions, which is again a barrier to meaningfully participating. The other issue that we can also highlight is that the Electoral Commission, in its guidance note, has to come up with what we call a protocol guideline. How does the Electoral Commission be able to, in administering the electoral cycle, at every stage of the way, have a guiding note that will guide them on how inclusive they can be able to manage an election? From the demarcation of the polling stations, from the printing of the ballots, from how inclusive, while involving disability people's organizations, because these know the how, they have the information on how some of these things can be included. So it's just a matter of how reaching out to them. But also what is very fundamental in there is that if it's about training electoral officers, some basic management of disability is very important. It is communication, but also management. If I come with a hard of hearing and I don't know how to communicate to me, how do you manage that someone? Sometimes these people have actually used very abusive languages, because then we have an attitude that people with disabilities have kind of not normal. So as a country, maybe we can improve our attitude, because disability is not an issue that someone will claim. All of us are capable to being disabled. Today I'm walking, tomorrow I'm going to probably be someone with a physical disability, or even a visual disability. So disability can come at any stage of life. So we can come as a country and improve on our attitude on how we involve people with disabilities across the board. Those are some of the few recommendations I'll be able to speak about.
Well, Deo Gracious, back to you here. What are some of the recommendations you believe that should be considered by the policymakers, and then also by your representatives for the persons with disabilities? Because at least this time round, you are amongst the PWDs, and then that means you are directly affected. What do you think should be done? What should we focus on? Where should our priorities be at?
Thank you very much. First of all, we need to focus on developing finance, organizations or agencies. It's very important. So you realize that most of the time you can raise issues, but you realize there's no accessibility. Do you know what they say? The challenge is where we don't have a budget. That is what I wouldn't wish to hear in the future. So we should develop a budget to include that. Number two, I also think that is very important to guide EC during election supervision. They should include persons with disability, because they do have experience. So when they identify a person coming, they can easily guide. So the simplest way we can do that is by EC working with the disabled person organizations. Third one, accessibility of the polling stations. It's not with the polling agents, but with the army or police. When there is violence, Do you know what happens? They slap them. They beat them because they cannot run. They throw tear gas to them. They cannot run. So any election involving the forces, the military police, is very sensitive. So even creating awareness is also important, because it will make everyone know each other.
My other question is also regarding persons with disabilities directly. Education-wise, how have, let's say, the persons with disabilities been going through school? First, especially those who are, like you, under your same category, the deaf, then those without the limbs, and those that actually, were born that way, or those who actually became disabled in, due to accidents and everything. How have most of them been able, to access education? Has it been very easy for them, especially in secondary school and institutions of higher learning?
In the area of education, I know the government has tried to improve the persons with disability through affirmative action. But where is the challenge? For example, in the university, affirmative action is there, but the number admitted is very small. So last year, I saw like 100 of them were taken, but we needed that number to be increased. Why would I need it to be increased? Though there is need, but many of them stop in primary, others stop in senior 4, others stop in senior 6, because they come from poor backgrounds and they do need that sponsorship. It's not only that because they are poor, but another challenge is resource utilization. Limits like the deaf, they can read some and use sign language. You see that the blind cannot read. They use braille. So the resources to be used are not enough. They must be aware that people with disability are also intelligent, but the situation is the one making them that. The attitude in leadership of the leaders, and even some parents do hide their children in their home, houses locked, because they say they can't waste their money. But most of the time, I tell them, you see me, I'm done with the university because my parents love me. So the same way they support the child, keep on pushing, you'll see in the future will succeed. But others, you see that this child stops only at primary, and some no. It's very bad. So it's like you're blocking the future of the child.
And well, now that takes me to the side of the employment sector, Mr. Ivan or team. We're talking inclusion. It's very rare, especially amongst the private sector, to find persons with disabilities employed. Okay, of course it does depend on the kind of impairment one has, But at times, one, for example, a deaf person or the blind, someone without the limbs, it takes a high class of humanity for a company CEO to hire such a person. And obviously we keep on pushing the agenda that disability is not inability, but it's so evident in the private sector that their space is limited. How are we going to put an end to this kind of mentality as a country, and how are we going to include them now into the socio-economic space?
First of all, one of the things that I would just highlight is enforcement of the law, because the law is elaborate on what limitations you can not undergo, especially from the levels of inclusion. But again, also, it comes back to the attitudes, the mindfulness of the people. With the person with disability policy, and I think of 2006, if I'm not mistaken, earlier had incentivized that if you hire a person with disability in the private sector, you get an incentive of certain levels of tax waivers. I think that time, people took up the opportunity from the other lens of kind of cutting their tax, not from the lens of offering the opportunity. I don't know if it was recalled, but one thing that I know that across government, even when you look at the District Service Commission, it has to have a person with disabilities. So there is deliberate recognition that some of these things have to be in place. From an inclusive perspective, which is a good thing, from the private sector, it will come out to the issue of costs. Someone will say, I need to hire you, but I'm going to hire 2 people. Because if it's about my brother Deo here, and he's going to be hired, Deo is not going to be hired alone. Deo was going to be hired with my brother, because then Deo is complete with his support. So if it comes back to, let's not look at the cost. What is the opportunity in offering someone the levels of inclusion? If we can look at the opportunity in a business, we call it the opportunity cost, right? If it's about the opportunity rather than looking at the limitation, the barrier, the cost, then we can be able to address some of these challenges. If we can go further and look at how humanity evolves, the Ubuntu culture, I am because you are, and because you are, I am. Then as a country, as a people, everyone will do whatever they have to do to make sure that people with disabilities are included across in employment, in gainful employment, included across in how they access some of these services, and that will make the world a better place. Because never know, today it is that someone, tomorrow is going to be you who is disabled, and you need the right services, and you don't want to be discriminated against. Thank you.
Indeed. And now the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda under Article 35 does provide that persons with disabilities have a right to respect and human dignity, and the state and society shall take the appropriate measures to ensure that they realize their full mental and physical potential. Now Article 2 as well, that is Article 35 2 rather, says Parliament shall enact laws appropriate for the protection of persons with disabilities, and the Electoral Commission is mandated under the Electoral Commission Cap 140 to carry, promote and regulate through appropriate means civic education of the citizens of the country, practicable to the use of sign language, to take necessary steps to ensure that the people with disabilities are enabled to vote without any hindrance and ensure compliance by all elections. But now, it does seem like the issue to do with transparency is one that we definitely need to work hard on. Now, let me get back to Mlangat Deo Gracious. First is many thanks for joining us for this in this entire conversation today. It has been a pleasure hosting you. I would want you to give us your final remarks as we are winding up with our discussion today.
Throughout the discussion, from the time we started up to now, it's very important to see that persons with disability are included in different areas: election, jobs, and education. Sometimes people in the government do feel that inclusivity is expensive, or attached to a cost. But speaking truly, that's not the issue. Because it can be any person. For example, the building that has steps. And we have a building that has a ramp. You will be surprised to see that everyone will leave the stairs and will use the ramp. Like the toilet, which is accessible, has enough space for the disabled to enter, but you'll see that almost everyone will tend to use the same toilet. What does it mean? The best way is try to develop a universal design that everyone can use. Don't say that the small one is cheap or the bigger one is expensive, but when you look at it, all of us are the same. Sign language interpretation depends on the communication. For example, me, I'm deaf. Why do I get interpreter? Because of the language. I have a language problem. I use sign language, but I do talk. What if a person is speaking Luganda and here my brother Tim is speaking English? Will you be picking each other and you don't know? That's the same basic way we can understand it. Don't feel like inclusivity is expensive, but ideas always shared and we find a solution. This discussion was nice. Thank you very much.
Indeed, pleasure is ours to be having you in here. Mr. Otim Ivan, in a minute, your final remarks of what you think should be done and what we should focus on as a country in regards to including the person with disabilities in everything.
So just be very brief. One classifying from their CAP strategy, which is about attitude, communication, communication, policy, participation. When you look at all these things, we can have them reflected on as a country, on what attitudes do we have for inclusion, what communication needs should we have as a country, what policies must be in place to take shape for inclusion to be able to exist. If the policies exist, then it's about putting them into enforcement. And the other issue is participation. Across all governments frameworks, within the electoral systems, we can drive participation from the sectors of all stakeholders, from the media. If the media is disadvantaged on how they can be able to communicate, there are people who have this knowledge and they can be a richer way. If it's about the private sector and how inclusive they can be, there are stakeholders who are there. If the government is incapacitated, we have a whole faculty at Chambogo that is teaching about supporting people with disabilities. that can come into place to facilitate the whole government structure and systems. So we have all these things in place. We don't have an excuse. The only excuse that we can have is every time we talk about inclusion, then the issue of cost comes in. So we can mark about this as a country. We can improve our attitudes and determine and say we can do this because it's about me and it's about everyone being included in the governance processes.
All right, many thanks for joining us, gentlemen, for this particular discussion. I've had 3 panelists on the show today, and among us the 3, one is a ghost panelist, I did say, but of course he has been helping us in the fact that the inclusion has been pushed. Now, the ghost panelists I've been having is Eric Ronald Omongin, who is a sign language interpreter, and he has been interpreting for us on behalf of Imlangat Deo Gracious, a program assistant, Show Uganda. And then also, on the other side of the coin, I've been having Otim Ivan from the African Youth Development Link from the perspective of breaking down a few of the policies. I'm Joran Paul Sonko, and our discussion today has been rotating around the inclusion of persons with disabilities into the election system of the country. Till next time, thank you very much for joining us. This has been the Policon.